very much about Kaluza. I mean, he was 32 years of age, so quite young in terms of holding the position of company man. But nobody really knows too much about his background and experience. But this guy, without any question, has some very, very difficult questions to answer. Because, first of all, I mean, Halliburton have now, I think, come to a deal with BP, because Halliburton have basically gone public and said, yeah, we hold our hands up. There were some problems with the cementing operation, and, we're going to take our share of responsibility, which has helped to sort of mitigate BP's liability.
Right.
But this is a classic case of the oil industry closing ranks, because, I mean, Halliburton obviously want to make sure they can continue to work for BP. And so, they've agreed to take some liability here, but of course they'll recover that by just picking up other contracts down the road.
Yeah, yep.
Now, the cementing operation is very, very important. The cementing operation is obviously what ensures that the geology is protected.
Right, yeah.
So as you drill the borehole, I'm going to try and make this as graphic as I can in my explanation. As you drill the borehole, then as you get deeper and deeper, obviously you put casing in place. And then obviously what you do is you've got to cement the casing in place. And this is done in stages. So the way the casing is held in place is that when you reach the point where you're going to do the cementing operation, the cementers, which in this case was Halliburton, the cementers have a design for a particular recipe, if you like, of cement that everybody agrees is the best product to hold the cement in place with this particular geology. So the cement is pumped down through the casing, and then when it gets to the bottom of the hole, it's got nowhere else to go except up the side.
Right.
So it's a very, very carefully calculated recipe. So the amount of cement that's pumped is very, very accurate, so that it's just enough to be pumped down the hole and then up the side, and it's pushed down with mud. Because what you don't want is you don't want cement setting inside the casing, because then obviously you've got to drill it out again. So it's the mud pushes the cement into place. Now, the way in which the casing is kept in place in the center of the hole is that spacers are used. And the guys doing the cementing design would calculate how many spacers are needed on a particular section to ensure that the well casing is absolutely slap bang right in the middle of the bore. So in other words, that the cement around the outside is even all the way around.
Right. Got it.
Okay, because that's how you ensure the integrity of the job. Now, what happened here is that Halliburton submitted a design for the job, and then something remarkable happened, because the BP company man, who I believe was Rob Kaluza, actually said, I don't think we need to go quite so excessive on the number of spacers. Now, this is remarkable. This is incredible. I mean, this is almost unheard of in the oil industry. I mean, no company man would ever really challenge the cementing design, which will have been done by, a very, very experienced cementing engineer.
Right.
And basically, the BP told Halliburton that they didn't need to put 23 spacers into this part of the job. Only 8 was needed. Now, my information is that Halliburton actually reported their concern. The cementing engineer on the rig reported his concern that he was being told to only put 8 spacers instead of 23 into this final stage of the cementing. And that was before the job was pumped. Anyway, the job was pumped, and as far as we know, it was pumped with only 8 spacers and not 23. Now, once the cement has been pumped and it sets very, very quickly, the next stage of the operation, and because we're in the final stages of the well production here, the next stage of the operation is to test the integrity of the cement. And this is where Schlumberger come along. Because Schlumberger, my former company, were commissioned to run what's called the cement bond log. So there's 2 stages to this. There's the surface test, and then there's the downhole test. Well, the first test is to basically hook up a spectrum analyzer on the surface to the casing, and to measure any vibration. Because if there's any vibration, however microscopic, it means that basically the integrity of the cement is in question. The casing is vibrating, and if it is vibrating, it's actually only going to get worse, because the pressure from the well is going to actually sort of make it work loose.
Right.
So Schlumberger didn't even get to the point where they ran the down-hole tests, because they established on the surface that the well was kicking, that there was vibration in the casing. So Schlumberger went to the BP company man and said, the well is kicking, it needs to be shut in now because it's going to blow. And the BP company man, who I believe was Rob Kaluza at this time, turned round and said, not on my watch. We're not shutting this well in on my watch. Now, Kaluza obviously would have known about well A, but this is where I start to believe that Kaluza was actually put on the rig to make this happen. So the Schlumberger guys couldn't believe this. The Schlumberger guys could not believe that the company man was rejecting their advice to shut in the well, because nobody from Schlumberger would ever make this recommendation gratuitously. I mean, for a number of reasons. First of all, their professional reputation, of course, is on the line. But secondly, if it was subsequently proven that the Schlumberger engineer had made a wrong call and the well had been shut in unnecessarily, BP would have effectively come back to Schlumberger and demanded retribution from Schlumberger in terms of the additional costs to be incurred from reopening the well.
Right, yeah.
And the other thing, because this whole operation on the Deepwater Horizon was pushing the limits of Western drilling technology. I mean, the one thing that I can categorically assure you, Henrik, is that nobody on that rig was a trainee.
Yeah.
Everybody would have really known their particular roles.
Yeah.
Now, the Schlumberger guys were spooked because they believed, obviously, that the well was going to blow. They believed they had sufficient information. And they demanded to be taken off the rig. Now, there's two stories here. The official BP story is that the Schlumberger engineers left the BP Deepwater Horizon at 11 o'clock on the morning of April the 20th on a scheduled helicopter. But the story that I have from inside Schlumberger, and I mean, this is unofficial because Schlumberger have obviously completely shut down any communication regarding this incident. But the word I have from within Schlumberger is that actually there was no scheduled helicopter that morning. And the Schlumberger engineers were so spooked, they called their manager in New Orleans. And every Schlumberger manager has basically worked, the rigs. So these guys wouldn't have had to spell out to the manager the detail. Once they explained that the well was kicking and that the company man was rejecting their advice to close the rig in, the Schlumberger manager would have known the severity of the situation.
Yeah.
So the Schlumberger manager chartered a helicopter, had it flown out to the rig, and brought the guys back to the Gulf Coast. And everybody agrees. I mean, the one point of the story that everybody agrees on is that the Schlumberger guys left the rig at 11 o'clock in the morning. And as we now know, of course, 10 hours later, the Schlumberger guys were proven to be absolutely correct in their prognosis, and the well blew. And then, of course, you have the conversations that have been reported. So, somebody, when he said, "Are you fucking happy now?" He was obviously talking to somebody who knew that this was a risk.
That's right. Exactly.
An absolute risk. Now, the Gulf Coast hearings, of course, should be getting to the bottom of this. But the reasons that the only BP company man to have given any evidence to the Gulf Coast hearing so far is Ronald Sepulvedo, who, of course, wasn't on the rig at the time. His counterpart, Donald Vidrine, is apparently very, very sick and therefore unable to give evidence. And Bob Kaluza has pleaded the fifth.
That's right. He's avoiding to testify.
Exactly. I mean, he's pleaded the Fifth Amendment. And, of course, the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution enables a U.S. citizen to refuse to appear before a court on the grounds that any evidence he gives, or he or she gives, may incriminate themselves. So the only way in which Robert Kaluza can be required to attend the Gulf Coast hearings is if the Gulf Coast hearings are given the power of subpoena. And obviously, the Gulf Coast hearings, which are being chaired by the US Coast Guard, they knew they were going to have problems getting people to come to their hearings, so they actually sought power of subpoena right from the outset. Now, when the proposition to give the Gulf Coast hearings power of subpoena was put before the House of Representatives, it was passed on a vote by 420 votes to 1. Okay? 420 votes to 1. So having passed through the House of Representatives almost unanimously, the bill to give the Gulf Coast hearings power of subpoena then went before the Senate. And here we have a classic indication, an example of the fact that the US is in the total grip of corporatism, otherwise known as fascism.
That's right.
Because when the bill was put before the Senate, it was rejected. It was totally rejected. It didn't even get beyond, I think, the first hearing. And so here we are today, 7 months after the Deepwater Horizon exploded, and the Gulf Coast hearings are basically completely toothless. Now, some of the questions that Kaluza needs to be asked, because I'm not suggesting for one moment that Bob Kaluza was the architect of this whole scheme.
He's one very important cog, obviously, but without the work, if you will, of some of the other involved parties here, like Halliburton and this whole cement story, he couldn't, pull this off, so to speak, right?
Exactly. And I think that the real architects of this are way up the food chain, and even Kaluza probably really only needs as much as he needed to know. But my conjecture is that Kaluza would undoubtedly be a member of one of the inner fraternities. My suspicion is that Kaluza is probably Phi Beta Kappa. Now, Phi Beta Kappa is a fraternity. I mean, everyone's heard of Skull and Bones, thanks to George Bush and John Kerry, of course, both being bonesmen when they were countering each other in the 2005 presidential elections. But Skull and Bones, of course, is unique to Yale. So you've only got 15 people initiated into Skull and Bones every year, which means that at any one time there's probably 500 plus bonesmen alive, of which, let's say, 300 plus are active. And that's why, Skull and Bones dominates the likes of, the White House administration. It dominates the Senate, the House of Representatives, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission. They make sure they've got their key players in positions to make sure that their agendas are carried out. But because it's unique to Yale, they then need to make sure that they have access to be able to control, the best and the brightest as they come up through the ranks from other universities. And so Phi Beta Kappa is much older than Skull and Bones. Phi Beta Kappa has been around since December the 5th, 1776. And the folklore is that Phi Beta Kappa was established by a group of people who were pissed off that they weren't invited to be signatories to the Declaration of Independence a few months previously.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Whether that's right or not, I don't know, but that's the mythology.
Got it.
But Phi Beta Kappa has such a hold that, I mean, you could basically Google almost anybody in the US administration. And if they went to Yale, it's a pretty fair bet that they are members of Skull and Bones. If they didn't go to Yale, it's a pretty fair bet that they are Phi Beta Kappa.